Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford, the podcast where we talk about what's happening here in Westford. I'm Steve from WestfordCAT, and I'm here with WestfordCAT journalist Alex Svenson.
Hi, how are you, Steve?
Good. How about you? Thank you for joining us, Alex.
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Also joining us today is Derek Lowe, a recent Westford Academy graduate and current senior studying political science and history at George Washington University. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
And once again, we have Nick Woodbury recording. Thanks, Nick. The stories on today's rundown are the response to a recent incident of racism in our schools, Governor Charlie Baker's plan for tax cuts, and Representative Lori Trahan's actions in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Links will be in the description, and feel free to tell us what you think about these stories in the comments. So, Alex, what's new in Westford?
Thanks again for having me. We're going to start off talking a little bit about this kind of ongoing discussion with restorative justice in regards to incidents of racial abuse that happened at Westford Academy now 2 months ago, back on January 28th. So this has kind of been a long process, but I've been following it a lot. I've been covering it a lot and watching all the videos on our YouTube about it. It's something like, I know it's a little different because I didn't go to Westford Academy than people who did go, so it kind of hits more close to home to them. However, I do kind of relate to what happened because there was an incident similar to what happened at our school my senior year. So we had, it wasn't like chirping from like the audience during a sports game, but there was kind of there was vandalism that was like racially charged, and it became a whole big incident in my town because it was like kind of part of the senior prank. It was racial and homophobically charged. At least what they wrote was. I don't know if the people really felt that way or if they were just trying to be rude. I don't know. But in conclusion, what happened is they used restorative justice as the method of kind of seeking justice to the harm that was done. So I covered the meeting that I think it was on the 4th. Is when the meeting took place. So they basically, Superintendent Chu, as well as Chris Sanders from the school committee, and Michelle Shannon Mingo from Pathways to Restorative, representative from Pathways to Restorative Communities. They held a kind of public hearing, a special public ceremony, kind of detailing like what restorative justice is and kind of their goals with how to like rebuild from the harm that was done in the Westford community. So essentially it started off kind of with Chu and Sanders. They kind of introduced everybody and kind of the goals behind it. They kind of gave everyone a recap on the timeline of the events that happened and then kind of what the purpose of restorative justice is. And then basically to explain restorative justice, they brought Candace Julian, and I believe she was from Pathways to Restorative Communities, and she basically explained like what it is, what the purpose is, what the goal is, and kind of how it's supposed to like rebuild people, kind of like educate them rather than just straight up traditionally punishing them. And yeah, it was a very interesting meeting to watch. A lot of it had to do with kind of like the history of racism in this country and state, and even in this town, kind of like with Westford being on like indigenous territory, which I've touched on before. But then it also had to kind of do with like what restorative justice is and the history of that, because of what I found out from the meeting is restorative justice is actually something that was first practiced by the indigenous people. So I thought that tied it in very well. So I was just wondering what you guys kind of thought about the meeting. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but I'm sure you're more than familiar with the incident. So
yeah, I didn't get to see the meeting, but I was actually at the basketball game when it happened, and I didn't see what happened, but I saw that something was going on. There were definitely, the coaches were worked up about something, and at the time I wasn't sure what. But Derek, you're on the DEI committee in town. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking for myself, not as for the committee. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not surprised that these sort of racial incidents happened because when I was a student there, they did happen, but they never got to the point that the media got hold of it and became something much bigger. I think I was a bit disappointed that a lot of people got focused on the fact that that there weren't going to be spectators for 3 days, instead of actually trying to get to the root of the issue, which is that we do have a problem with, racism, these microaggressions in this town, and it does actually need to be addressed. So I was very pleased to see the webinar take place. I thought it went very well, and I'm looking forward to seeing those community circles that the first one took place last week or so. Looking forward to seeing those continue.
What do you think about Derek, the using restorative justice as the preferred method of kind of rebuilding, as they say, from the harm that was done? Because a lot of what they did, a lot of what Candace Julian did in this meeting was kind of, she asked everybody, think about a time in life when you've been harmed, and then think about what you felt, and then think about what you needed to kind of overcome these feelings, and it kind of avoided traditional punishment. So I was just wondering what your opinion is on using this process as a way, if you think it's you think it's like the correct or proper way of doing it, or do you wish they kind of did it differently?
I mean, I think it was an appropriate way to handle it. That said, not every different instances are going to have different ways of addressing it. I think it's important that the victim's voice is the one that's being at the front and center of the conversation, the one that is being amplified. I think it's also important to underscore the need for an environment at the same time for students who have not necessarily to the level of this, because I think there definitely is a consequence, and I think there are some instances, especially when I know Westford Academy right now, they're kind of doing a little more DEI equity work going on right now, having students kind of look at themselves. And I think one of the things is on the schools, there needs to be more of cultivating an environment where the students feel it's okay for themselves to have to learn from it, that they're not just going to be judged on that, but that it can build on that. Because the fear is that the students, they get so afraid that they'll be ostracized for what they said, that's it. It's black and white. There's nothing else to it, and are just like, well, it's easier for me to shunt out what's being talked about instead of actually trying to learn from it. So that's one thing I think is important to keep in mind in all of this.
I think you make a really good point with that. I do like the thing that I appreciate about restorative justice is that I feel like it kind of gives people another chance, so to speak. So I've never been like a huge fan of kind of the whole like cancel culture on social media. With like kind of just like, I like how it gives people a second chance to learn from their mistakes and rebuild. That being said, the one thing I have with restorative justice is like, although it does give people the chance to kind of realize the harm they caused and learn to kind of become a more open-minded and perhaps less bigoted person in the future, I feel like it's a tough way to keep these events from happening in the future, because I feel like some people might kind of take advantage of the system and might be like, oh, well, like if like they might not see it as like enough consequences to stop it from happening in the future. That's the one concern I have, because I mean, obviously, like it's really hard to just stop people from discriminating, because it's something that's like been indoctrinated in many people from growing up, unfortunately, from not being exposed to enough different cultures and people. But I think the one problem I have with restorative justice is I don't really see how it prevents future incidents of this happening. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that.
Well, and to that end, I think it's an interesting conversation about how do we prevent this from happening. There's actually an angle here that I haven't really heard talked about that I want to bring up and see how it bounces off you guys, which is trash talking. And so, whenever you get into a kind of a competitive environment, there is an element of strategy in getting the other team's mental game kind of off kilter, making them tilt and lose focus.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll find this in sports, you'll find it in competitive video games, you'll find it in politics. And to some extent, I think trash talking can be good, but I think we definitely have an example here where trash talking was taken way over the line. And what I've seen in schools is I think the athletes themselves are completely cut off from, like, if you trash talk, you're off the team. But I haven't seen that enforced so much in the student section. And that student section at those basketball games gets raucous. I've heard some interesting chants thrown at the refs when there's a bad call. And it seems like there's a lot of any energy that in there that's difficult to rein in, and really like, how do you rein in a stand full of kids all shouting at the game? And I think in that excitement, it's easy for a few people to take it too far and to let some of their biases come out where they wouldn't normally otherwise, because you get kind of that mob mentality, and you become a part of the group, and then somebody steers in a direction that it shouldn't go, and everybody follows because that's what the mob is doing. And I wonder how you really can rein that in without having like direct supervision by a staff member, a faculty member, who's just constantly kind of keeping an eye on what's going on in the student section. But how do you kind of find and how do you educate people about like what's acceptable trash talk and what's just totally over the line? I heard what some of the insults hurled at the basketball player were, and definitely like these are not things that you would say in polite conversation.
Yeah.
So like, how do you rein that in? It would be my question of you have this situation where there's all this raucous energy going out, and you need to kind of steer them in an acceptable direction. And how do you do that?
Yeah.
Any ideas?
Well, what I would say as someone who like grew up playing sports and who's been to many different sports games, both professional and like college and high school, I think there's like like you said, it's a bit different when you're actually on the field, when you're one of the athletes, and you're trash talking. And then from the stands, because obviously like when you're in the stands, like you don't really have to worry about anything. You're just kind of there for the experience and just try and give your team like the moral support. So I think like it's actually tougher to, like you said, to monitor it in the stands than it is in the field. But I think like to an extent, trash talking like is part of the game. Like I think it's like included. Like I think it's something that I would say is acceptable, but there's a thin line you can't cross. So like, for example, if like you're on the other team, and like, for example, one thing is, I think if you're going to be talking trash, it should always be against the other team. It shouldn't be against your own teammates. First of all, like if your teammate makes a mistake, you shouldn't be trash talking them. That's not going to help like the team effort if you're playing a team sport, that is. Now, I think if if you're talking about something the other team did, then that's okay. But it's got to be something that's like related to sports. Like as soon as you start bringing up their race, gender, ethnicity, or religion, it becomes unacceptable. And I think the same thing should apply to the stands, because like when I said, going to like sports games in high school, like there'd always be people like trash talking from the stands, but like it's one thing if they're just kind of like trying to chirp and be kind of funny, or just like talk about like something that happened, like the player, like they screwed up or something, or like they did a bad play. Like that's one thing, but like or something that's funny about the town that they'll make fun of. But like as long as it's something that's like not to a personal level where they can't change it, like their race, ethnicity, I think that it's pretty clear. And I think the only way to enforce that is like, I've heard of people saying that like you shouldn't say anything and then later report it anonymously. And I get how that might work for some people, but I think that's just kind of ridiculous. I feel like if you see someone saying something that's over the line, you should call them out publicly, just like, because like we have our First Amendment, because you can say whatever you want, it's protected, but that also doesn't protect you from getting condemned by other people. Or like because we've had incidents at our school before, like my high school growing up, and like we've also had incidents even where it's gotten like violent before, where like the stands, like there'll be kids fighting each other. And I think violence, like I think that's another example, violence, racism, discrimination, that's over the line. Like playful trash talking about the other team, their town, or one of their players, just like how they play, that's fair, I think. I don't know if you have a differing opinion to that, but
no, I largely agree with that. I think one thing I'm curious to see is, I know the MIAA, who kind of handles the high school athletics here within the state, is kind of looking at whether to have a more clear policy when it comes to spectator behavior, and things like that. But no, I agree with you that, if you're going to be trash talking things like that, that should really be based, around, the opposing team members,
performance.
Yeah, performance.
Not their appearance.
And I think outside of that, those things really don't belong in the conversation.
Yeah, I just think it's absurd because like people can't change for the most part how they look. And obviously people are like don't want to change like their background. People should be able to feel comfortable and proud of who they are and where they come from in any community. So I just think it's absurd that anyone would think that like this kind of racist talk's acceptable. But again, like I said, I still think it's absurd to be like there can be no chirping at all, no trash talking, because that's just an integral part of like the athletic like mindset and competitive mindset. So
yeah, well, and if you go to an exciting game, like you get that energy out, it's cathartic to have that little bit of opportunity to talk a little trash. But it's also, I think it's important to know where the line is and to not cross that line. And that's something that I really hope that WA is having conversations about with its students. Because from what I've seen, the only real enforcement on that is at when you walk into the gym, there's a sign that says, please be on your best behavior, no unsportsmanlike conduct, all that kind of thing. And that's beyond that, it seems to really be kind of self-police. And I wonder if there's a better way to approach that. I don't have an answer for that. Just kind of throwing it out there.
I just think there needs to be more of like a zero tolerance policy. Like they've been trying, obviously, I'm a big soccer fan, for instance, and it varies from country to country, but obviously there's a huge problem with racism in that sport and like people, and also like some other types of ethnic discrimination but they try to enforce like a zero tolerance policy. Like if you're caught doing that, you get kicked out. And I think it should be the same also like with violence, with fighting as well. Because I just think, I don't know. I mean, I guess to us it seems obvious, but like I guess it's not to some people. But like it's like one thing to like make fun of a player for like how they play or just something they said. And that happens from high school up until like professional sports. And I've been to countless of games where there is some pretty like low blows, but it shouldn't have to be said that you don't be racist. Like that's just something we should all know. But I don't know. I guess to some people it's not that clear, which that's the one part I find absurd. But
well, and Derek, you mentioned you were a little disappointed with kind of the direction of the conversation and how everybody wanted to focus on keeping all of the students from attending the games when it was just I don't know if it was a single student or a small group of students that were doing the chanting. But I think it actually is an effective tactic to kind of get the group to enforce it. What do you think about that?
No, I think it was important to give a couple of days to kind of reset and understand, yes, spectators certainly have a role when it comes to the games and so forth, but making sure that they're there for the right reasons, right? And they're not, leading to players having, racial taunts being said towards them. I think that's really important to keep in mind as we get the conversation going.
No, I agree with that. However, I also see the point where I get how it can get other people around that, but I also think that there should be the one problem I have with banning all the players and then having with the one problem that I have with the outcome of restorative justice is I feel like those same people are just going to be back there again, and they could potentially do that again. Not like I said, I'm against cancel culture. I always believe in a second chance, but I think at least for a while, they should have just banned the perpetrators and not let other people suffer as well, because it would kind of single them out more and make them realize these people are all having fun at the games. What did I do? I screwed up. I shouldn't have done this. So that's just what I think. But
and I may be dating myself with this reference, but what it makes me think of is the scene in Full Metal Jacket, where there's the cadet who I don't know what the term is for those guys. This Private Pile has the donut hiding in his locker, and when they find the donut, R. Lee Ermey makes the whole group do 40 push-ups or whatever it was, and kind of punishing the group for the actions of the individual, and then the group itself later enacted its own justice. That night they held him down with a sheet and beat him senseless. And obviously I think that's maybe a little aggressive as in terms of response. But that idea of getting the group to basically enforce the rules on the individual, because they know that they're all in it together. And if one person is out of line, then everybody's going to get punished for it. I think there is some legitimacy to that idea. And that is, I would say that's why I like the strategy of just shutting down attendance for the next couple games. And, you know, I think there were students who felt like they were treated unfairly, but if they don't want that to happen in the future, maybe they should be keeping an eye on what's being said. And like you said earlier, if somebody's crossing that line, to just reach out and say, hey, that's not cool.
Yeah, I think it's better than just like going behind the scenes and then like trying to cancel them by just like ratting them out. Like, I just think like it's not going to change the fact that the damage is done. And I just feel like it's more mature just to be like, stop it. Like, you know, just take responsibility for your actions. Really all it is. So I'm sure we won't spend too much time with this one, but the next story, it's from, I think like 2 weeks ago at this point, maybe a little longer even. But Baker proposed a plan to grant nearly $700 million in tax relief to primarily low-income and middle-income Mass residents. This was primarily as a result to like all the unemployment that arose from the pandemic. And basically, he did this as part of the state's fiscal year 2023 budget proposal, which also includes a $48.5 billion plan that would continue to support economic growth across the state. And it would also fund the Student Opportunity Act and invest in housing and healthcare. So there's like different opinions on this proposal. It's mostly supported by Democrats and many Republicans at the State House. Although actually the main critics of it was more from the progressive side. They actually thought that Baker kind of dropped the ball a little low on it. But regardless, Baker's trying to kind of help improve Massachusetts economy and invest more to support economic growth and kind of sustain the educational system and also support the health and well-being of the residents. Like I said, he specifically targeted both middle and lower income residents and also the elderly. So, but like I said, some people still don't think it was enough given all the damages of the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically, I was just wondering what you thought, both of you, about kind of this proposal. What do you think money should be allocated to with the state's budget proposal? And also, do you think like that's enough for the tax relief or it should be more? It's kind of an open-ended question, but.
Yeah, Derek, any thoughts before I jump in?
Why don't you go ahead first?
All right. Well, so just in when I was reading over the article, what jumped out to me is that a lot of those approaches seem to be benefiting middle income more than low income. And I know it's targeted at both, but it seems to be kind of weighted towards the middle income. And to that end, I think I can understand where the progressive criticism is coming from. Because, you know, like there was a capital gains tax reduction in there. And that's great if you have enough money to invest in the market or buy property and sell it and get those capital gains. But for most low income folks in the state, I don't think they're going to benefit from a reduction in capital gains tax or an increase on the cap for your estate tax or the estate tax deduction. Yeah. What I did see in there that I think will be helpful is credit against renters. Yeah, that was increasing by a couple thousand, and I think that will be good for everybody.
Yeah, I was actually just going to bring that up. Like the rental deduction cap, like and the credit to renters, because like the rent was still going up during the pandemic. Like I actually rented the current apartment that I'm in right now down in Boston, like during the height of the pandemic. And I mean, it actually, that one didn't go up that much. Like they're putting it up again on the market. It's not that much higher, but I've heard of some like crazy increases, and it just was tough for people when they lost their jobs to be able to afford the rent. that kept going up. So I do think that part of it is important.
Well,
for sure.
And it's remarkable that we avoided that wave of evictions that kept on, everybody was predicting was going to happen, and then it seemed like it never showed up. And I don't know if that's like still working its way through the legal system, if it's still out there and something that could happen, or if we have successfully dodged that bullet. But definitely, I think rental assistance is really helpful, kind of regardless of the situation, because there was a meme going around a couple of years ago from the rent is too damn high party. You get the guy with the big beard.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's just kind of universal all over the country. The rent is too damn high.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also do think I like how he was trying to eliminate, kind of like reduce the income tax for like low income taxpayers. But I like, at the same time, I don't know. I don't actually have like a strong opinion on this. I mean, I think it's good that they're doing this. But I don't know if there should have been more money allocated, like some of the progressives say, because I do know our state has a lot of money in our budget, but also like a lot of the businesses took a blow during COVID. So I think, I mean, I didn't read about all of the budget proposal, but I do think that like small businesses should be like prioritized a lot to help kind of boost our state's economy. Because a lot of small businesses have started they like went out of business during the pandemic. So,
well, and the other thing I noticed in there that I think will be broadly helpful for lower income families is the expansion on the dependents. The one thing I saw in that is that the amount was so small. It's moving from like a couple hundreds to a bunch of hundreds, but that's like still, in terms of overall magnitude, that doesn't make a huge impact.
Yeah, that's one of the things they said, is they kind of said it wasn't adequate enough to overcome the problems brought by COVID, and kind of just addressed ongoing issues that have existed in the state for many years. So I do think they have some of a point with that. But like I said, I also think the state's economic growth and business is like a major priority, as well as addressing the rising rent. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But.
No, I think one of the things is I never really, I hear politicians talk so much about the middle class, but there isn't really much talk about those in low class or poverty. And, you know, I hope that, you know, politicians, you know, actually try to spend a little more time thinking about that, and that their budgets, you know, are reflective of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that could stem from a little bit the part that like many politicians believe that like the typical American family is just like a middle class, like white collar. It's kind of that whole like old stereotype of what American families are. But like the middle class is shrinking. It's becoming less and less in this country. And there's many Americans. I don't even know if actually a majority of Americans are middle class. I'm sure they do fall into the middle class, but there's many Americans that are kind of disenfranchised, that are more on the lower class, and they feel like their needs aren't often addressed.
Yeah. And I mean, I also hope that with this bill, it will help those whose wages got cut or had to take new jobs in the aftermath of COVID. Because, you know, while there are a lot of jobs out there, for a lot of people, that was significantly less than what they were making before. So I think that's, you know, one of the things I'm hopeful to see where this bill goes with that.
Yeah. And, you know, building on that, we hear that like it's a great time to be looking for a job, that everybody is hiring. But from what I've seen, it seems to be a lot of the jobs that are available right now are lower wage jobs. And so, well, yes, there might be a lot of jobs that are available. They're not a lot of good jobs that are available.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that has been kind of increasingly an issue in the last couple decades, not only in the state, but kind of across the country, of that. Yes, jobs are being created, but the quality of jobs that are being created is not reaching the level of the jobs that are going away.
Yeah.
And that contributes to this evaporation of the middle class. And I don't know how to address that other than investing more. And raising minimum wage. And I know that raising the minimum wage doesn't necessarily help companies, but it helps employees.
Also, I've heard like proposals before of like a nationwide minimum wage, but I just don't think that's a good idea given the fact that like to live in Massachusetts, the cost of living is just way higher than if we were living in like Mississippi or Louisiana. So I do think that should be a state level thing. However, I do think some states really lowball the minimum wage to like a ridiculous level anywhere. And also I have to slightly dispute that claim that like there's a lot of job opportunities right now. I still think there's a lot of companies that didn't fully recover from the pandemic so far. I think, like I said, a lot of small businesses took a hard hit, and a lot of smaller corporations, like more grassroots corporations, also took a hard hit. Just like I mentioned to you earlier before we started shooting, but like 19 local newspapers across the state are going to shut down by May or be merged into another company. So that kind of shows you that for sure had I mean, that was already an ongoing issue with that funding for that, but then like the pandemic was kind of like the final blow. So I do think it depends on what field you're looking for to say that there's a lot of hiring right now.
Yeah. Well, and if you drive around, just driving around the commercial areas in Westford and looking for where the help wanted signs are, it's restaurants. You know,
Yeah.
Chipotle is only open until 3:00 now because they couldn't get a manager to cover the evening shift. Or so I've heard. That's not confirmed.
Yeah.
But that's what I heard about that situation, because I used to eat at Chipotle a lot, and now like they close at 3, and I never even get in there because I don't eat lunch until 5.
Yeah.
But then like the pizza place down the street from me is help wanted, and those are not the same caliber of jobs that you're losing when you have businesses shutting down and like losing newspapers.
Yeah.
Those are much better paying jobs than the kind of thing that you're going to get delivering pizzas.
Yeah. Plus, like you mentioned, like they needed a manager. Like I'm sure they could find staff to like run the cashiers and all that, but like a lot of these like small businesses, like a lot of them like either lack management or like a lot of them also like because of to tie back into like the rising rent, especially the closer you get down to the city, down near Boston. A lot of places weren't able to afford the rising rent that happened during the pandemic because they weren't getting enough income from being closed for so long. And they unfortunately had to go out of business. Some of my favorite restaurants down near the State House actually had to go out of business because they couldn't keep up with the rent. And not to get into a whole nother different topic, but like also part of that, I think those businesses, they didn't have to be closed for as long as they did. Because I know like the whole getting like slowing the spread, but there's a lot of other ways like takeout and stuff that could have or outdoor seating. And I just find it interesting because a lot of other small businesses too, such as like gyms, health and fitness centers were closed for a long time. But those places, like they're keeping it clean, people there are staying healthy and everything. And it's like most of the spreads happening at like restaurants and stuff. So I always thought that was strange that a lot of those small businesses that weren't the food industry were closed for even longer. I think that might have to do with something like the politicians. They want to be able to meet in restaurants, and they all have their own home gyms. But I don't know. I'm not going to make too many assumptions and go down a whole route. But
there have certainly been a handful of scandals, and more than a handful of scandals of politicians doing things they shouldn't be, and gathering at parties and having pictures leaked.
It is interesting too, because it's also like I said, like they keep like gyms, like they're clean and like people there are being healthy, but like they were closed for longer than restaurants, which were like the ones that were spreading the most. And like I said, big restaurants too, like we're like not these small businesses. So it seems odd, but it's a whole. I don't want to go down that whole topic. Like pandemic, thankfully, is starting to slow down.
Thanks for listening. Before we continue, I have a couple of quick announcements. If you know any kids who want to learn about video production, sign them up for WestfordCAT's Lights Camera Action Camp in April. Over the course of a week-long program, kids will learn to plan, record, and edit their own video projects. Sign up at rodenbush.org. WestfordCAT is offering to recycle small electronics and alkaline batteries on an ongoing basis. For a small donation, you can drop off your used electronics and batteries at WestfordCAT, and we will have them recycled. On Tuesday, April 5th, the station is partnering with Eviva Trattoria in Westford for a fundraiser. When you order from Eviva Trattoria, just mention WestfordCAT, and the restaurant will donate a portion of your order to the station. Now we're going to take a quick break and come back for more after a word from our station.
WestfordCAT is more than just television. We have the equipment and knowledge to help you get started as an independent media creator. Find us on YouTube for local news, Westford Academy sports, and media content created by Westford neighbors and friends. Or look up our website at westfordcat.org for details about the station and how to get involved. Funding for local media is on the decline, so if you appreciate our work, please become a member of the station or make a tax-deductible donation to support local media. Links are in the description. Thanks for tuning in.
We're back with more news and discussion. Just a quick reminder, links to these stories are in the description if you want more information, and we invite you to leave a comment sharing your thoughts.
So this could be like 3 episodes in of itself, so I won't get too into all the details, but everyone who's been like alive recently, just like any news station anywhere, is reporting about Russian invasion of Ukraine. So as someone who like kind of specializes in like foreign relations and geopolitics, that's kind of always been like, it's my minor at school and it's always been an interest of mine. I was following this conflict for a while up until the invasion broke out, because a lot of people forget that since 2014, when the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula happened, these two countries were in a proxy war with like the Ukrainian separatists who were the Russian pro-Russia separatists in Ukraine against the Ukrainian government. It was going on for 8 years, and then it wasn't until February 24th that Russia finally invaded the country as a whole. Now, the invasion, like I said, that sparked international outcry. All of a sudden, everyone was like, uh-oh, this has gone too far. The U.S. and all the NATO members in Europe, specifically like a lot of the big Western European countries, they all condemned the invasion. They called on Putin to stop waging the war and to respect Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. One of these politicians in the U.S., other than Biden and the White House, who's been a very outspoken critic of the Russian invasion, is Lori Chahan, who represents, I think, the 3rd district of Massachusetts.
Yep. And for anybody listening who doesn't know where that is, that's us.
Yeah, it is. It is, in fact. But yeah, she basically condemned the invasion. She joined many of her colleagues in the White House to condemn the invasion. It was, to be in all fairness, it was very shocking to many people, even if you were following the situation, because I, for one, thought there was going to be kind of another wave of war, but I didn't realize it'd be as quick and to the extent that it was. And a lot of people have kind of compared this. I've heard a lot of comparisons saying that this is the most violent, bloodiest war in Europe since World War II. I think that's a bit of a crass comparison, just because like people are forgetting like the Yugoslav wars and like the Russian Chechen wars and all these other wars, like, and even like the Soviets' invasion of Hungary back in there's so many conflicts. I don't like to compare it. Like, people are forgetting about a lot of them, but I will compare it to the Cold War in the sense that it seems like these two countries fighting has had a ripple effect in world geopolitics. So yeah, Chahan, basically, she was one of the first to condemn it. Seth Moulton, also another Massachusetts representative or U.S. representative in Mass, condemned it. So basically, they basically think Putin's intentions are completely wrong, because Putin's saying he's trying to help the Russians in Ukraine and get rid of what he called like a junta government. But they say that he's kind of trying to get his own way and bring back, let me find her specific quote here. She actually had a good quote. She said first that Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is a violation of international law. And then she said it constitutes a massively destabilizing effect with repercussions that are going to be felt for a long time. And Putin's actions are that of a rogue, power-hungry dictator's desire to resurrect the glory days of the Soviet Union, no matter the cost. So like I mentioned before, people have compared it kind of to the Soviets' invasion of like Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and during the Cold War. But I like that quote a lot, because it does kind of show that Putin basically is trying to restore Russia's status as a global power. And when a lot of these nations bordering Russia are starting to move more towards the West, he's losing more and more allies. So I kind of see why he did it. But most obviously all Ukrainian people and also many Russian people are against this war, and they think it's ridiculous. And most of the Russians who support it have just been like, there's a lot of misinformation, I will say, and even on the Ukrainian side to a lesser extent. But yeah, so Tran basically called for an immediate drawdown of Russian military forces. She called for protection of Ukrainian sovereignty, which I think is interesting because Ukraine's not a NATO member and they don't have any ties with the EU. So technically, NATO can't intervene or do anything besides sell them weapons and arms. And then the only foreign countries that have so far intervened are actually just citizens volunteering in Ukraine. As opposed to the Russian side, who's gotten support from Belarus and now Syria. So it kind of shows you the difference, though, between the two sides, because Ukraine's only accepting people who are willing to fight, including many civilians, while Russia has to get soldiers from other countries even to join them.
And it sounds like not even all of their soldiers understand or understood what they were doing when they first went into Ukraine. And I've heard stories of the Russian military stopping to ask for directions from Ukrainian civilians.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you guys really not understand your objectives? Is the information being controlled that tightly that you don't understand what the Russian army is doing?
Yeah, there is a lot of like propaganda and stuff, but it's shocking for many as well that they're attacking a country that's always been, I mean, like there's been many ups and downs between Russia and Ukraine throughout their history. It's been very turbulent, but they are still a very culturally similar country, and they've historically been close. So it is hard for many soldiers on both sides to just kill each other in cold blood like this, because it seems like to many that they're like a brotherly nation from all the Russians and Ukrainians I know and I've talked to. But regardless, the U.S. taking a strong pro-Ukraine stance. You could literally just go outside and see like Ukrainian flags displayed everywhere. And Shahan said basically that they're going to slam Putin with sanctions. Russia's main exports, funnily enough, to the U.S. Are oil and gas, which you can imagine, and then alcohol. So they're going to ban all of those from the U.S. and from Massachusetts, she also mentioned. And many lawmakers back at the State House down in Boston have also echoed this, including State Rep Patrick Carney. He introduced a bill that would block the purchase of Russian imports. So also outside of both the White House and the State House, there's been protests almost every Sunday with Ukrainian Americans and others kind of protesting the invasion and calling on Putin to stop. So I do think I was just kind of specifically focused more on what Trahan said than the whole conflict, because like I said, I could talk for hours about that.
Well, and one question, in all of your time following, have you heard anything about her opinion on the no-fly zone and whether we should enforce that or not?
Not really, actually. I don't know if she's spoken on that yet, because I was just going to ask you both what you thought of the sanctions, because a lot of people support the sanctions, and I think the sanctions are good for not allowing the Russian government to get as much wealth, but also they have these multimillionaire oligarchs who are funding them. And I do think a lot of the sanctions also hurt Russian people, because I know some Russians at my school who like their bank accounts froze and they can't get any money. Like they had to pull all their money out in cash before. So I do think and people like a lot of these politicians in the White House and in the Capitol, I should say, because they're reps, they don't understand that. So I was just wondering what you guys' opinions are about placing sanctions on Russia as a way to try and stop the war efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I think sanctions, they can be an effective measure. But no, to your point about, you had friends, people you knew who, are Russians. I think it's important. I think it's always very important. I think this could apply to really many geopolitical issues, to separate the government from the people. I think that's really important. I think, we see, in the past with COVID-19, a lot of hate directed towards, Asian Americans, right? And, there are legitimate ways to criticize the government for how they handle things, but it really should be, the focus should not be about punishing the people. We don't necessarily, in Russia, really have a say necessarily how their government operates. I think to what Tran said, I'm pleased to see that she's kind of a leader in trying to push, pushing for those sanctions, and so forth. I guess we'll continue to kind of see where that kind of goes.
Yeah. The one thing I will say, to play a little devil's advocate here, what do you say to those people who are like, the people elect the governments? Because that sometimes, because I mean, like I said, I mean, it's a bit different in Russia, so it is a bit of a loaded question, because Russia's obviously not democratic.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
neither is Ukraine.
How
but,
fair are those Russian elections
Yeah.
that are resulting in the same politicians always
But-
getting into power?
What do you say to like the people though who still support Putin, and they don't even live in Russia, for example, because they have access to more than Russian state media? What do you say to that?
Well, I think they're clearly not experts on Russia.
Yeah.
Well, if they actually understood it, they would see, well, if you're political dissidents and opposition candidates, you look at Navalny, for example, getting poisoned and so forth. I think about 15, 20 years ago, one of the presidents of Ukraine was poisoned rather seriously, right? I think there's only there's a certain amount, there's only up to a certain amount you can do in trying to explain to someone why Putin is clearly a tyrant and making these kind of decision that's not democratic.
No, that's a good point. And I also think, like I said, a lot of people that I know, for instance, most Russians I know are against the war. I'll say, I have to use very specific language here. Most Russians I know are against the war, but obviously not everybody in such a country that doesn't have the same freedoms as somewhere like here, for example, is going to exactly speak their mind on it. They're going to stick with what they're going to support their government, because that's just what they've been told to do. It's really what it is at the end of the day.
Yep. Well, and getting back to your question, I like all of the sanctions against the Russian oligarchs and all of the kind of asset seizures and shutdowns of accounts and things that we've seen. I think that's effective. What I have a little bit more mixed feelings on are companies like McDonald's and all of these companies that have businesses in Russia that are then pulling that business. And I can see the benefit, because those businesses are generating taxation, which then goes to fund the Russian government. But Russia is a petrostate. It gets most of its money from oil.
Yeah.
It's not getting a lot of its money from McDonald's.
Yeah.
And kind of to the point that you've both expressed of separating the government from the people. I think those sorts of actions hurt the people more than they hurt the government. And so that's where I kind of see trouble with that. I'm fully in favor of seizing yachts from rich people.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about like shutting down restaurants on street corners in Russia, I can see the argument how that's impacting the Russian government, but I really think it's impacting the people a lot more. And that's what gives me pause about those policies.
Well, that's the thing, is like those millionaires who are like funding the government and the military. Like, I think the military should be, I think an effective thing, and I believe the US has done this a while ago, but I think the most effective thing is when we cut off selling arms or buying arms from Russia. I forget when that happened, but it happened a while ago, I'm pretty sure. And I think any country that does that, that is probably the most important thing you can do. But then I also like what Germany did with cutting off Nord Stream and cutting off that project, because that's like a major source of wealth for the Russian government. And I think that does a lot more than like recently Coca-Cola, I believe, refused to pull out of Russia, and they were getting all this hate. And I'm like, how much is like Russian people not being able to enjoy Coke helping for the government or helping for the war, because these oligarchs can just go to Dubai and buy as much Coke as they want. The regular Russian citizen does not have that privilege. So
yeah, well, and Germany shutting down that Nord Stream program was a big commitment on their part, and I think that was a really big step for them, because that would have, if they had kept that open, that would have sent a lot of money over to Russia, and getting them to commit to kind of taking the economic hit of finding their oil elsewhere is a really big step. And thank you Germany for being willing to kind of take that hit and stand with the rest of the world in supporting Ukraine that way.
Yeah, no, I think Chancellor Scholz has done a great job with his position right now against Russia. He took a more anti-Russia position than Merkel has in the past. But back with Trahan real quick. So what do you think about her proposal along with the sanctions to ban Russian imports to the U.S.? You think oil and gas and alcohol and all these other products? Do you think it's a good call? Because I can kind of see oil and gas, because like you said, it makes up a lot of their economy. But like, how is pulling Russian vodka from the shelves really doing anything?
Yeah, I think that there's a valid question there, and I don't really have a good answer for that. I think definitely, we've seen our gas prices go up a little bit because we've banned Russian oil, and just because of other general effects of the conflict. I'm okay with paying a little bit more, but I drive a Prius, so I don't use much gas anyway. I would not want to be still driving my old Ford Escape these days. That I think if I was in that position, I would not look as kindly. But I can pay a little extra at the pump to help support Ukraine.
No, I agree with that for sure. But I honestly don't think pulling vodka from the shelves is doing anything, because it's just harming some business. I mean, some of them are big corporations, but it's still a private business. So I feel like you're just harming businesses over there. That might just be people, that might just be people's jobs. Like, I don't know how much is their government being funded by like the manufacturers of like Ruski Standard and Stoli. Like,
and that's the big question is like, what's their actual percentage of their budget that's coming from the alcohol industry? And if I find that if it's a bigger percentage, then that makes me a little bit more in favor. But kind of getting back to the idea of like, McDonald's is not a big source of revenue. Is alcohol a big source of revenue from Russia? And if the answer is no, then I would tend to agree with you on that one.
I think also keeping in mind, Russian Americans who have businesses, who have, established lives here, right? They have businesses here, restaurants, and once again, going back to that point about people having, even in our country, having a lot of difficulty separating the people from the government. You're seeing Russian American businesses being targeted and so forth. I think is really, really disappointing to see. So that would also be a concern of mine if, her suggesting that we should expand kind of those imports, beyond your oil, gas, those kind of areas.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then actually, one of the last things I was going to ask is Trahan makes a very bold point against, she says, these sanctions that they announced, this was like, I think 2 weeks ago, the second tranche, and they're devastating for Putin's military and his allies financially, but they're just the start, especially if Russia refuses to back down. She's like, we're going to start with his inner circle, and the next step is targeting Putin himself and ensuring that Russia is economically isolated from the rest of the world. All that because there can be no mistake without that invading without cause is a peaceful neighbor comes with harsh consequences. So do you think, though, that the U.S. putting sanctions on Russia is really going to harm them that much? Because like I said before, a lot of their money comes from these oligarchs who go to all these other places. Like they'll go to like Dubai, for example, or they'll go to like Abu Dhabi, and they'll have investments. They'll get money there. And also like several other countries that also have a lot of wealth, like China, for example. Like Russia gets a lot of I think the majority of its trade is done with China. So like I can see if it was like a small country like Belarus that maybe like cutting them off. But I feel like Russia like just makes so much of its own products and also like has enough trading partners. I don't know how much these sanctions will really do.
Well, I think we've been seeing that some of the oligarchs have been starting to take a more kind of stance kind of against Putin. Yeah. Because kind of seeing that. And I'd be curious to see over the next few weeks how much further that can go. Mm-hmm. I think the Congresswoman's right that this is just one of several steps, that the U.S. will probably need to take further. In collaboration. I know the EU was selling arms and so forth over to Ukraine, which if I recall is the first time they've done that since as an organization, which is, as you say, to Germany's point earlier, a very bold step. But that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and also with some of Ukraine's neighbors, like Poland especially, but also like Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, they've been taking in refugees as well. Poland's taken like over 1 million, like 1.5 million, just from this last invasion. That's not including 2014. I feel like that is doing a lot to help Ukrainians. But so just like this is also a bit off topic, but like my final question is, you think the U.S. should be accepting Ukrainian refugees, but also Russians who are trying to just like flee their country so they can spend, like use money and actually like do regular things? Because a lot of Russians also have been fleeing to former Soviet states like Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and stuff like that, and so they can use their money and just like live regular lives. So do you think that the U.S. should be open to accepting all those people?
I think the U.S. should be open to accepting both Ukrainian and Russian refugees.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if we look at, our history in the past, we have accepted refugees from countries that, we're not in a formal state of war with Russia, but those countries that are in conflict that we're supporting, whether it's as part of NATO or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even if there wasn't a precedent, I think it's clear that once again, the focus, yes, you're criticizing, you're going after the government, but the people ends up being the victims on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that they're still able to get the support they need. So yeah, I'm definitely open to that.
I think that's a good point. And because also to touch on what you said earlier, I think if the U.S. were to take Russian refugees as well, or just migrants, we'll say, but they shouldn't be like, people should make sure, like people should try and prevent any, like call out any discrimination, just like how Chinese Americans should never have gone through what they did because of China during COVID.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think that needs to be said as well and touched on. So anything you want to add, Steve?
Yeah, well, just in terms of refugees from Ukraine, yes, absolutely. Let's bring them in and get them out of the cold. To Russians, I would generally say yes. I do think we need to make sure that we're getting Russians that are truly like fleeing from Russia and not Putin supporters who are moving into the country to try and pass info back to their handlers.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the U.S. immigration process is so grueling that I think we would probably do a pretty good job of filtering most of those folks out.
Yeah.
And so, I would be in favor of allowing Russian immigrants to come in who are trying to flee the disaster that is a collapsing Russian economy and a psychotic Russian president. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think the U.S. is definitely able to support these people, especially because we have a job shortage. So it would be great for the economy, and also like it would just be great on a humanitarian level as well.
Thanks for listening, folks. We hope this leaves you a little better informed about your town. If you liked this episode, tell YouTube to share it with your neighbors by clicking the like button, and tell us what you think about these stories down in the comments. Thanks to Nick for recording. Thanks to Derek for joining us in the studio. And thanks to Alex for telling us what's new in Westford.